Angle relationships you dealt with in IM1, so you should know the different types of angle pairs, and when I talk about them, hopefully they'll come back to you. But this is all review. So, if you have two parallel lines, what do you know about those two lines?
They won't cut.
They won't ever cross each other, right?
Yeah.
Now, in IM1, you learned about a line that goes through those parallel lines. Does anyone remember what that's called? Transversal. Good. Okay, so you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, and different types of angles are formed. So real quick, we're going to label all these angles so we have an example. It's okay. We're just doing some of the basics. Okay. So, there are different types of angle pairs that we're going to go through. So let's start with corresponding angles. Does anyone remember which angles would be corresponding in this picture? 2 and 5, no.
2 and 4. No.
2 and 4 is 2 and 4 is correct.
Always making sure you wait.
Okay, so angle 2 and angle 4 would be corresponding angles. That's an angle. Sorry. It's an angle symbol.
Oh, I was looking at parentheses.
Yeah, it's an angle symbol. I know, because I squished it in. That's my bad. So it's angle 2 and angle 4. There are other corresponding angles. Which are
1 and 3.
1 and 3, 6 and 8, 5 and 7. Okay. So here's the definition of corresponding angles. They are angles on the same side of the transversal and on the same side of their parallel line. So they're on the same side of the transversal and on the same side of their parallel line. So if you look at angles 2 and 4, they're both above the transversal and they're both to the right of their parallel line. Do we remember there's two different types of, there's two different ways we would set these up. They're either going to be equal to each other or they're going to be supplementary. Do you remember which ones corresponding angles are? Are they congruent or are they supplementary? They're congruent. So they're going to be equal to each other. They're congruent. What does supplementary mean? They add to 180. Okay, good. So that's the first one, is corresponding angles. Does anyone remember another type of angle? Alternate interior angles. And do we have an example of alternate interior angles? 2 and 7, I'll take 2 and 7. Angle 2 and angle 7 are alternate interior angles. And the name of this one tells you exactly where they're located. So they are on opposite sides of the transversal. And inside the parallel lines. So they're on opposite sides of the transversal inside the parallel lines. Do we remember if these are congruent or supplementary? These ones are congruent as well. So these angles are congruent. What other types of angles do you remember? Alternate exterior angles. Do we have an example of alternate exterior angles? 1 and 8, okay. And when I'm writing down these examples, this is just one of potentially multiples. Okay, I'm just giving you one example of it. These ones also tell you exactly where they're at. So they are on, again, the opposite side of the transversal. But in this case, they are outside the parallel lines. Are these angles congruent or supplementary? They are also congruent. The fourth one that was common in IM1, people tend to forget. Does anyone think they remember the fourth one?
It's like the most right. I know.
We're going to get to vertical in a second.
Yeah, it was vertical.
Okay.
Same side. Oh yeah.
Do you remember same side interior angles?
Isn't that linear?
Not no.
Linear is linear.
I'll show you linear in a second. It might have been also, they may have also called it consecutive interior angles.
That one.
Oh, okay. So same side interior, consecutive interior. Which angles do you think those are?
105. That's exterior.
Interior.
2 and 3. 2 and 3. Same side. They're on the same side of the transversal inside the parallel lines. So angles 2 and angles 3. And then 6 and 7 would also be same side interior. 1 and 4 are not. Correct. So same side interior are on the same side of the transversal inside the parallel lines. And are these congruent or supplementary? These are supplementary. And again, supplementary means what? They add up to 180. Good. Okay, I heard someone say vertical angles. So before I even get to that, these are a lot of the ones you used last year. We don't so much use them in IM2, but we definitely use vertical angles, so you need to know vertical angles. These might also be referenced, not mathematically, but referenced as kissing angles, because they're the ones that face each other. So what would be an example of vertical angles? 2 and 5. 7 and 4, yep. So angles 2 and 5 would be an example. These ones are important for us. We need to know them. So they're the ones that face each other, known as the kissing angles. And do you remember if these are congruent or supplementary? They're congruent. Okay, vertical angles are congruent. And then someone said, I think it was Natalie, said linear. So we're going to call them a linear pair. What would be an example of a linear pair? 1 and 2. Okay, so for it to be a linear pair, it's on the same straight line and they are right next to each other. So 1 and 2, 1 and 5, 6 and 2, 5 and 6. Okay, they're right next to each other on a straight line. Yes.
Aren't they also called adjacent angles?
Adjacent angles would be another name. Yep.
Aren't they also?
We can write that. And are these, wait, what did we say? We used 1 and 5. So angle 1 and angle 5 would be a linear pair or adjacent. And are these supplementary or congruent? They are supplementary. Okay, so we'll use probably vertical angles and linear pairs the most often once we get into like the IM2 curriculum, but it is important to know all of them, and it sounds like you guys had a good IM1 teacher who helped you remember all of those. Okay. All right, so let's actually solve a couple problems. So what type of angles do we see? Corresponding. Everyone okay with corresponding? And corresponding angles are congruent, which means you set them equal to each other. So 80 equals x plus 2. I'm hoping we can solve that. Yeah?
78.
Okay, so you subtract 2 from both sides. X equals 78. And how can I check to be sure that that's accurate? Plug it in for x. So 78 plus 2 gives me 80. 80 obviously equals 80. Okay. What kind of angles are those? Vertical angles, and vertical angles are congruent. So again, we're going to set them equal. So 2x minus 45 equals x plus 30. What should we move first? Okay, so to move 45, we're going to add 45 to both sides, giving us 2x equals x plus 75. Then subtract x. So you should end up with x equals 75. And again, you can check it by plugging it back in to see that they're actually equal to each other.